There was a little undeclared war on France which made the existence of the Democratic Republican Party. This was led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison at first, but eventually was only led by Thomas Jefferson after the election of 1800s. This was the first time power was peacefully transferred from the Federalists to the Democratic Republicans. Now that TJ was president, he bought the Louisiana Territory from France.
Hey, I bet you didn't know the Louisiana Purchase was double the size of the U.S.
Lewis. He sent Lewis and Clark to explore the new territories west of the Mississippi River. Sacagawea was their guide and translator. As soon as they came back, American settlers poured into the westward states seeking economic opportunity and the land and to farm. The growth of railroads and canals helped the growth of an industrial economy and also supported this westward movement. Then there was more migrating into the south, mostly Florida, by these American settlers. This was because of the victory of the British in the War of 1812. Because of the migration into the south, Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, which led to the spread of slavery. American migration, especially in this case Texas, led to the Battle of the Alamo. In this battle, the band of the Texans fought to the last man against the superior force. The Texans eventually had a victory over the Mexican forces, which brought Texas into the Union. So the American victory in the Mexican War led to the gain of major territory that includes present-day California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, parts of Colorado, and New Mexico. After all that, the Monroe Doctrine was created, which stated 4 important points. The first one is the American continent should not be considered for future colonization by any European powers. Then, the nations in the Western Hemisphere were very different from those of Europe, republics by nature rather than monarchies. The third one is the United States would regard as a treat to its own peace and safety any attempt to European powers to impose their system or any independent state is the Western Hemisphere. And the fourth one is the United States can't invade into European continents to help them in any way. There was a great impact on the American Indians during the Western migration of the Americans. The American Indians were repeatedly defeated in violent conflicts with settlers and soldiers and forcibly removed from their homelands. They were either forced to march far away from their homes, which was called the Trail of Tears, or confined to reservations. The regional self-interest led to a divided nation at war against the British. The nation was divided by Federalists who opposed Madison's war resolution and talked of secession and proposed constitutional amendments that were not acted upon. The causes of the War of 1812 was the interference of British against the American shipping and the Western expansionism, fueled the call for a declaration of war. An extension of the franchise westward expansion and the rise of sectional interest prompted increased participation in the state's national politics. The changing charter of American politics in the age of the common man was characterized by equality in the political processes for adult white males, the rise of interest groups, politics, and sectional issues, a changing style of campaigning, increased voter participation. Personified the democratic spirit of the age by challenging economic elites and rewarding campaign supporters with public office called the spoil system. The industrial North favored high protective tariffs to protect northern manufactured goods from foreign competition. The agricultural South opposed high tariffs that made the price of imports more expensive. South Carolinians argued the sovereign states could nullify the Tariff of 1832 and other acts of Congress, a union that allowed states governments to invalidate acts of national legislature could be dissolved by states seceding from the union in defense of slavery, which is called the nullification crisis. President Jackson threatened to send the troops to collect the tariff revenues. As new states entered the Union, compromises were reached that maintained the balance of power in Congress between free and slave states. The Missouri Compromise drew an east and west line through the Louisiana Purchase, with slavery prohibited above the line and allowed below, except that the slavery was allowed in Missouri, north of the line. In the Compromise of 1850, California entered as a free state, while the new southwestern territories acquired from Mexico would decide on their own. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 repealed the Missouri Compromise line by giving people in Kansas and Nebraska the choice whether to allow slavery in their states, which is known as popular sovereignty. Slave revolts in Virginia, led by Nat Turner and Gabriel Prosser, fed white Southerners' fears about slave rebellions and led to harsh laws in the South against the fugitive slaves. Southerners who favored abolition were intimidated into silence. Northerners, led by William Lloyd Garrison, publisher of The Liberator, increasingly viewed the institution of slavery as a violation of Christian principles and argued for its abolishment. Southerners grew alarmed by the growing force of Northern response to abolitionists. Fugitive Slave Acts pitted Southern slave owners against outraged Northerners who opposed returning escaped slaves to bondage. At the same time, the abolitionist movement grew. Another form of movement took place, to give equal rights to women. This took place by the Seneca Falls Declaration and the roles of Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, who became involved in women's suffrage before the Civil War, but continued with the movement after the war.